you would like to rid the world of religion. Is that too strong?
That's not too strong.
Okay, good. All right, good. All right, good. And so when you say that, here's my question. Are you saying that the structure and the history of religion is something that you just want to get rid of? Or are you saying that you want to get rid of what some people do in the name of religion? Do you make that distinction? Is that one that's relevant?
I certainly want to get rid of... Well, I see virtue in the effect that religion has had on human culture. I mean, I see virtue in music and art and things like that. But if we think of religion as providing an alternative idea for how the universe came into existence, how life came into existence, that kind of thing, then as a scientist I want to get rid of it. I mean...
Which I agree with.
Okay. Well, what part do you not want to get rid of?
Yeah, good. Well, let me just give you an example, and you tell me where you come down on it. Maybe that's the most straightforward way of doing it. So, in Jewish, so I'm Jewish, maybe a few others in the audience. Thank you. So not all, of course, but many Jews here in New York view their religion in the following way. They're willing to cherry pick it for the parts that enrich their lives. They're willing to throw away the parts that are archaic and just have no place, in the modern world. They're willing to view it as almost poetry, almost as fiction literature, with the one difference being that it connects them to a long lineage that makes them feel part of a larger narrative. Is there something that you don't like about what I just said?
Oh, I get that totally. I mean, I have no problem with that.
No problem with that?
No. Because, I mean, you have a heritage, you have ancestors, you have literature, you have... I mean, it's the same as I feel, no doubt you feel too. A connection with Shakespeare. I mean,
right.
I don't have any problem with saying I have a Christian heritage, a Jewish heritage. In the case of a Jewish heritage, you have an even stronger reason, which is the persecution of Jews,
right.
Which has happened through the centuries, and perhaps most notably in the 20th century, but earlier centuries too. This is a very powerful reason for a kind of loyalty to a tradition. Where I part company with it, as you do, is where it makes claims about the universe and the nature of life and that kind of thing.
So when you say, just for my own clarity, when you say that when you agreed, and everyone sort of cheered, which is sort of fun, that you wanted to rid the world of religion, I wouldn't have thought that this would then be your reaction to my description.
Well, I suppose by religion I meant the scientific falsehood of religion. I did not mean tradition because there are in the Jewish tradition, there are all sorts of other traditions, tradition in literature, tradition in art.
Right.
I don't want to get rid of that.
So then I wonder about the following. So religion as as a word, a few 500 years old or so. It's not one that really goes back to archaic times. So, and there are some who have thought through the history of religious development and have indicated that the use of religion in the ways that you find utterly unacceptable is relatively recent, a relatively recent development. So if you take this structure that, go back a handful of thousand years, wherever you sort of want to, view its origins, 1500, 2000 BC, something of that sort, let's just say, does it not feel that you're focusing so intently on the last part of the development of that structure in a way that at least as I've heard it, and it's different from hearing it tonight, which is very interesting for me, wipes it all out by virtue of what's happening now.
I'm skeptical of the suggestion that the scientific falsehood part of religion is recent.
I'm sorry, what?
That the scientific falsehood part of religion is recent. I'm aware that there are people who say that.
Yeah.
And I think they're wrong. I mean, I just think if you go back to the Old Testament, it would just be nonsense to say that the characters in Abraham and David and Moses and people were not interested in the scientific, quasi-scientific aspects of it. Of course they were. I mean, they were obsessed with it. They believed that there was a person called Yahweh who made the world and who actually intervened the whole time, who wrought miracles and things like that. I think it's Karen Armstrong who's made the case that the scientific part is recent. I just think that's not historically accurate.
So, but if one takes this metaphorical approach, as I was sort of describing it in that particular case, well, let me actually frame it somewhat differently. So, to what extent are you okay with, I don't know how else to say it, but irrational ideas? Can I just give you an example again? I don't know, about 3 weeks ago, I live uptown, and my mother lives over here, 81st Street. She's in her 90s, and I called. She's always home. She doesn't really go out without me. I called, the answering machine picked up. She didn't answer. I called again. She didn't answer. I'm starting to really freak out. So I get in the taxi cab, and I'm racing down to 81st Street, and I'm telling you, in that taxi cab, I was praying to God that she would be okay. And I'm praying to God, and I know that I do not think there is a God, okay? This is a totally irrational thing that I'm doing. Let me just quickly say, if you're there, I'm sorry, all right? If you're, I just got to hedge my bets, it's a conversation here. I'm just sort of saying how I feel. But I'm really praying, and when I got there and everything ultimately was fine, it felt like, a small miracle to me. Now, I don't believe in miracles. I believe that we're all bags of particles governed by the laws of physics, and there's nothing else besides that. But at the same time, I find it useful to hold these irrational ideas in mind at certain moments, and I don't give a shit that I do.
Yeah, I get that. I mean, I think I'll make a similar confession. I would hesitate to spend the night in a notoriously haunted house. The faintest.
Oh, this is a good night, man. That is so.
But I mean, we are both being irrational, and that is a sin.
I agree. All right, I'm being waved at to open the discussion for audience questions. I can't see who's out there. I don't know who has a microphone, but whoever does.
We need the lights up. Can we have the lights up, please, in the auditorium? That's not in
not so much on us. Yeah, good, perfect.
That's not perfect.
Is it in your eyes?
Yeah. I can just about dimly see people now.
Yeah, whoever has a mic, just jump right in.
Good evening, and thank you for a wonderful, wonderful night. I guess my question is, how do you dovetail rationality into the social and political dialogue that's going on in not just the United States, but in the world today? How do you combat irrationality with rationality at an emotional level, such that it's kind of
so the question is, did you hear it?
I did hear it. I was hoping you'd answer it.
Yeah. I can take a crack, and then you can sort of, clean up and finish it up for me.
I mean, we live in a time when rationality and truth are not respected in corridors of power. how do you reconcile? Well, you don't reconcile them. What you do is you get out and vote the bugger out.
But I would add one quick thing on that. It's virtually impossible, I've found, to have a conversation with somebody who's not going to play by the same rules. And so it's virtually impossible to use rationality to convince someone who's looking at the world and describing things in an irrational manner. And I think we once discussed this, if I'm not mistaken, but I saw a video of yours once when you had a long conversation with a woman and trying to convince her about the archaeological record, right? And I sat there and I felt for you because I have had those conversations with people about, the Big Bang and things of that sort. But it was clear that you were never going to make headway in that conversation. So you stayed with it, which is great, but that approach probably is ineffective,
yeah,
right?
she was a hopeless case. I know who you mean. Her name is Wendy Wright. And she clearly was not listening, and you're right, it was a totally lost cause. But remember, this was a television program. So although I was talking to her,
right,
it's irrelevant whether I could convince her. I clearly couldn't. But there would have been lots of people watching that television program.
That's true, yeah.
who would have been influenced by it and recognizing that she was being completely irrational. And so I don't buy the argument of it, which I've heard often, that because you cannot convince the idiot you're talking to, that means that you should simply give up. I mean,
right, right. Yeah, I guess the quick question, but we have others. Would there be another strategy? And I don't know what the answer to that question is. And there are one or two questions from the audience still. So I think you're side.
Sure. So going back to the idea of string theory, when you guys were talking about how to actually combine the two formats of math, I guess.
Yes.
Since we are the ones that actually created math to begin with, is it possible that what we use is fundamentally flawed to describe what you're attempting to do?
Totally, it's totally possible. I mean, I've had thoughts, I don't know, nightmares, that when we have these conversations with the alien intelligence that we ultimately talk to, they'll come down and say, "Show us, guys, what have you done?" And figuring out the universe. And we pull out general relativity, quantum mechanics. We open it up, and they just sort of look, math. We tried that. It takes you part of the way, but no, you'll never get anywhere with mathematics, And the problem is, when I then try to imagine what it is that they would substitute for mathematics, I don't have the creative imagination to think of anything that isn't ultimately isomorphic to math. Math just with some different formulation that we could map onto mathematics that we currently use. So yes, it could be that we have a limited set of tools based on the limited thing inside of our head. It's taken us so far, but maybe it will not take us to the end.
Thank you.
So when I end up having discussions about science and religion to a surprisingly frequent extent, I end up encountering the viewpoint that science and religion are actually one and the same thought process, that science is a form of religion in one way or another. And I try to debate that in a number of ways, but I would be interested to hear what you would have to say to someone who says, well, science really isn't any different from religion in the first place.
Well, I'll give a real quick one, and maybe Richard will follow up. There are similarities, there are radical differences, and the most radical of all is show me how to use any religious text. I don't care, pick any one that you want. Show me how to use that to calculate the spectrum of helium. Right? So there are qualities of the world that we understand rigorously by virtue of the scientific structure. It is mathematics that makes predictions that we can go out and test, and moreover, if we test a prediction and it's wrong, we throw the thing away because we are incrementally moving toward truth, and that's quite different. And let me just quickly also add to that, just so you know that I'm not just spouting hot air. I really will put my money where my mouth is. I would be thrilled if tomorrow string theory was ruled out. I've worked on it since 1985, okay? I had black hair when I started, okay? but I'm not invested in it. I'm invested in truth or getting closer to truth. And this is the way that we can move toward truth.
I have nothing to add to that. I mean, I think it's absolutely right. And there's a huge difference. And the difference is evidence. In massive, massive, massive quantities of evidence. And in the case of religion, there is absolutely none whatsoever.
Given the singularity at the beginning of the universe, the Big Bang, and the evidence that particles are entangled,
Yes.
that if that implies that all particles are thereby entangled with each other, does that intuitively have any implications for consciousness theory?
It's a good question. Since we don't really understand consciousness as we were describing here, it's a little hard for me to give you a complete answer to that. But I will say the following. It is the case that when particles interact with each other, they do acquire this very strange quantum mechanical quality called entanglement. Einstein, again, was a key figure in figuring out entanglement, as you no doubt know, but just so that we're all clear, if two particles are entangled, one could be over here, one could be over here, they could be on opposite sides of the country, opposite sides of the universe. You measure this particle and somehow it instantaneously affects the particle over there. That's weird, right? Einstein called it spooky action at a distance, right? Now, when you have all these particles interacting near the Big Bang, they do all become entangled, but the thing is, the greater the number of particles, the more dilute the entanglement becomes. And it can be diluted to such a degree that to some extent it doesn't really play the kind of fundamental role that it would with just two particles in a pristine environment that you set up to be maximally entangled. So while in some sense everything is connected to everything else, and maybe you want to think that consciousness therefore is sort of connected to the world through some quantum entanglement with our brains, the degree of entanglement is just so fantastically tiny that it's hard to imagine that that's how things will turn out.
Richard, anything?
Obviously not.
Thank you.
I'm just fascinated.
Thank you very much for both coming out and the lively discussion. I grew up in New York City and I had a Jewish earth science teacher, but and so I didn't have the conflict between religion and science that Mr. Dawkins grows up with. And he just pointed out, if you believe the world was created in 6 days, how long would a day have been by that metaphorical understanding? So I was very grateful for my public school education. But my question...
Hey, I went to PS 87, IS 44, right down the street, so I'm with you.
My question is entangled with the previous one. The double-slit experiment in quantum physics implies that an electron will behave as a wave when it is not being observed, but returns to acting like a particle when we try to observe it, judging by the interference pattern it produces. This implies that the universe we live in is conscious. Without personifying this intelligence, would you agree, Mr. Dawkins, that quantum physics implies that our universe is conscious?
No. I mean,
Thank you.
Of course it doesn't imply that. It's nothing to do with it. It's deeply mysterious, but there are different ways of being mysterious. Just because they're both mysterious, it doesn't mean they're the same thing.
Yeah, there can be an error in thinking that often tries to imagine that consciousness plays a critical role in causing the fuzziness of the quantum world to resolve into definite reality, such as in the experiment that you described so well. But there's no evidence that consciousness is a vital part of that story. We believe, there were people in the 30s and 40s who put this idea forward, and it's very hard to rule it out, just like it's hard to rule out many things in the world, because we always bring consciousness to bear on any data that we look at, that we become aware of, that we can speak of. Consciousness is part of it. You could say, therefore, consciousness was part of ensuring that reality arose. But as far as we know, it doesn't need to be consciousness that brings a definite reality. It doesn't need a physicist with a PhD. It could be a mouse could do it. It could be a dust mote that could do it. It's any kind of interaction It could be a photon in the microwave background radiation that bangs into the electron, and that forces it to snap to attention. So I don't see any direct role for consciousness, but who knows? We could be wrong.
Good evening, gentlemen. Thank you. One of the tangents we went down tonight was exploring the concept of extraterrestrial life or life outside the galaxy. So from Richard's point of view, you said we're a sample size of one. So all our concepts of what one may be is what we see before us, regardless of our imagination. And when you look at Hollywood and you look at aliens, they're sort of humanoid. And my thinking is any superior race has to be sort of like us because we got to be able to make. I can't see something with tentacles making a watch. So are you limited to what you believe a race may be outside of our existence because we're human and we have no other concept to measure against?
Science fiction writers are often criticized for lack of imagination and making them sort of humanoid but with 3 eyes or some minor difference like that. There are biologists, Simon Conway Morris at Cambridge University is one, who actually thinks that the likelihood is that life would produce humanoids, and he goes, I think, too far, but he does make the point that convergent evolution is very powerful, and we have spectacular examples in the animal kingdom of different radically unrelated animals converging on the same design, because that's a very good way to be. You're probably familiar with, well, for example, Australian mammals, the marsupial fauna of Australia, produced a range of mammals which were niche for niche convergent upon the mammals in Asia and independently in South America. So he deploys the power of convergent evolution to suggest that if there is life elsewhere in the universe, quite probably it will look pretty much like us. I don't think I go along with that quite, but the point has been made. We talked a bit earlier about different kinds of life, whether it has to be carbon-based, that kind of thing. And I think it's an open question, and I think we can get a sort of handle on the question by looking at the animal kingdom and looking at the different things that have evolved in the animal kingdom, both divergent and convergent. But I think it's an open question, and I would, as I said before, I would love to come across a second sample of life.
I'll look around outside the parking lot.
Yeah, I didn't hear that.
I didn't hear it either, but it was definitely funny.
Thank you.
Hi. You guys have talked a lot about T0, what happened after that. I don't think there's been a lot of talk about what happened, or not what happened, at T0. What happened at T0? What created it? Isn't that? And the universe happened. 14 billion years later, we have life. So everything was so precise. Does that imply some kind of God, watchmaker, something? I mean, could you delve into more what you think about what happened before that instant at the Big Bang, not everything after?
Well, I'll start with the Big Bang, and then Richard maybe take it into the biological domain. But the question you're asking is, why is there something rather than nothing? And it is the key question, and it's one that we really have absolutely no idea how to answer. And I think we're all upfront about that. But once we allow for stuff to exist, space, time, matter, in some sense the laws of physics, with that minimal architecture, we can then run things forward. And as far as we know, we don't need anybody from the outside tinkering with things in order to get things where they currently are. So could you say that some God created it and then stood back? Of course, and this has long been said, and there's very little that we can ever say to refute that. The point of the matter, though, is it's not very interesting. It may be true, it ain't interesting. Why? Because you're just replacing one mysterious collection of words with another word, which to me holds as much mystery. So from the standpoint of explaining science, I don't find that it takes us anywhere forward. From the standpoint of understanding the rich structure of human heritage and our ongoing attempt to figure out who we are and how we fit into the cosmos, I do find there's a lot of value in that way of thinking about the world. But I don't find any value in terms of trying to find scientific explanatory power.
I think it's worse than that. I think it's worse than just not interesting, because the point is that although it's very difficult to know what happened at the beginning and where the laws of physics come from, where the physical constants come from, what we can say is that it is relatively easier to understand how simple things came into existence than complex things. And a God who thought it all up and created it, even a deistic God who didn't subsequently intervene, whatever else he, she, or it was like, they could not be simple. I mean, if we're going to credit them with the brain power to devise the laws of physics and to set the physical constants to some optimal value, then they've got to be the kind of entity that requires explanation in its own right, of exactly the same kind of explanation as we in biology are used to providing in the theory of evolution. So it would have to be intelligent, in other words. And intelligence, creativity, inventiveness, qualities like that come late in the universe. We understand where they come from. They come from evolutionary processes. To suddenly smuggle in intelligence at the very beginning is to betray the entire scientific enterprise. So it's much worse than being uninteresting. It's positively anti-scientific.
So the one thing I would say is, well, since you got applause, I'll sort of agree with you. But my suspicion, or at least I raise as a possibility, the judgment of the complexity and intelligence required to give rise to the universe as we know it, I feel like you're coming at it from what we currently understand, which could well be completely misleading. There may be this incredibly simple starting point that a divine being could have invoked, and all of this might, by virtue of some deep symmetry in the structure that isn't even apparent, it's all simple from the standpoint of the ingredients and the laws, and it may be so I guess I slightly worry, even though I largely agree with you, I slightly worry about saying what would be required, because we don't know what would be required. That's what I mean by us not being able to figure it out.
But if it's simple, why call it God? I mean,
no, I agree. That's exactly the point that I made. It would be just replacing one word with another. But I guess I worry about the argument of trying to delineate the degree of intelligence and complexity required. I have no idea whether what you said is true in that regard.
But if it's just plain simplicity, just call it simplicity.
Yeah. So that I agree with. But it was the attributing a certain necessary level of complexity and intelligence that I find hard. But I agree with the larger point that we're just replacing one word with another. So you seem unsatisfied with that. I should have stopped when I convinced him of string theory. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, if I was listening carefully enough earlier, I think it was said that the whole range of physics, from quantum mechanics to general relativity, you could understand the machine of the brain, but not consciousness. And two things occur to me about physics that aren't understood, and I'm wondering if you have any comment as whether consciousness might be fueled by dark energy or by the collapse of Schrodinger's multiplicity into the actual measurable singular.
So for dark energy, it's hard for me to see where there'd be any connection. You know, the amount of energy in dark energy is so feeble in any volume compatible with everyday experience that it's hard for you to imagine that energy making a significant difference. But when you come to the collapse of the wave function, the Schrodinger equation that you described, there are some very smart people who do draw a connection to consciousness, right? Roger Penrose is a very smart man. He was my graduate advisor at Oxford for 2 weeks, and he is convinced by virtue of analysis that he's done for a decade and experiments that he's done with neuroscientists, that there is a connection between microtubules in the brain that can collapse the wave function, and he believes that that's the seat of consciousness. I've looked at it. I don't see it. I'm not convinced of it, but I can't say that I've studied it in great detail. So is that a possible link? I guess it conceivably could be.
Thank you.
I don't know if you...
I've tried to read Roger's book, but I must say I don't understand quantum theory enough to.
Right.
Hi. So my question, it's a fun question that I thought of because we were talking about a little bit how Lord Kelvin, though a really brilliant scientist, was astoundingly wrong about certain things about the universe and Earth. And so I wonder if we took two well-known scientists from your respective fields, let's say Einstein and Darwin, and we brought them to our time, what do you think that they would be the most astounded and amazed by with our current scientific understanding? And what do you think they would find the hardest to accept or be most skeptical about?
So I can do Einstein if you want, or do you want to leave with Darwin?
I once had to do a television program in which a Japanese television company brought an actor dressed up as Darwin to visit me, and I was supposed to bring him up to date as to things that had happened since his death. It was an interesting experience because he was well made up. He had plenty of slap on, which kept on dropping off. I sort of bowed very low and said what an honor it was to meet him and things. And then I had to explain to him about modern genetics. And this would have been very surprising to him, very interesting, not so much surprising as revelatory to him, because in his own lifetime, not only did Lord Kelvin's estimate of time worry him, he was also worried by a man called Fleming Jenkin, who made the point that because of the prevailing genetics of Darwin and Jenkin's time, which was blending inheritance, they were aware that, of course, that animals inherit from both parents, but they thought of it as being a kind of mixture of the mother and father, almost like mixing two liquids. And Fleming Jenkin pointed out that if that were the case, offspring should be intermediate between the two parents. And if that were the case, then there would be a rapidly, natural selection would run out of variation on which to select. And this did worry Darwin. He shouldn't really have worried because it was quite obviously not true that variation disappears. It's not the case that as the generations go by, animals become more and more grey and sort of uniform. They do retain their variation. But nobody understood why. And it wasn't, well, Mendel, who was a contemporary of Darwin, actually did discover why, but Darwin never knew about it. It wasn't rediscovered until after Darwin's death. So I had to explain Mendelian genetics to this actor posing as Darwin, and also DNA. And he did his part well. He said, "Yes, that's it." So I don't know whether that, I mean, I think that is one thing that would have, as I said, not quite surprised Darwin, but he would have felt, yes, everything clicks into place now. And I now, that was the one thing that Darwin got wrong. He got precious little wrong. I mean, if you read The Origin of Species, it is an amazingly prescient book. As Michael Gieselin said, he was working 100 years ahead of his time. Astonishing man. But genetics he did get wrong. And so that perhaps the answer.
Yeah, so quickly on the Einstein one, I think Einstein would be surprised that quantum mechanics is still with us effectively in the form that he detested. And he thought that advances would do an end run around quantum mechanics, and somehow all the weirdness would disappear with a deeper understanding, and it hasn't happened. I also think that, as we describe as we describe string theory and all the qualities of the theory, and I think you just say you guys are geniuses. Utter geniuses. Yeah.
I have a question for Brian regarding mass. I understand from Einstein that a particle's mass increases with acceleration. At CERN, they take protons and accelerate them to very close to the speed of light, over 99.99% of the speed of light. My question is, what is the change in the mass of that particle from rest to the point of collision?
Multiply it by 1 over the square root of 1 minus v over c squared. V is the velocity, c is the speed of light.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
I didn't understand that answer at all. And so I have to write this, but I'm going to ask, hopefully, for a non-pessimistic answer to this question, which is, I'm a little puzzled by the disappointment in the search for extraterrestrial intelligent life, because it seems challenging by, or severely limited by, two elements. One is astrobiology, which seems to suggest that the combustible energy sources that would be, they suffocate the species that create sufficient advancement to support radio wave broadcasting. We're suffocating ourselves. And the other element that I find challenging in terms of evidence for extraterrestrial life is the time synchronization needed to collect a radio signal. The duration of a species that broadcasting is probably short.
Yeah.
The universe, when I was growing up, we thought it was expanding. Now you guys have changed the rules again.
No, still expanding.
But it's accelerating.
Yeah,
it's accelerating. So in some period of time, we're only going to see our own galaxy. So you've got a dual-pronged problem of combustible energy suffocating us or others and getting the signals to synchronize. So why would we see
I agree.
extraterrestrial life?
You're pointing out how unlikely these programs are to succeed. I mean, look, life on this planet began very early on in the history of this planet, but in that 4 billion year window, as you're saying, we've only been radio broadcasting, for the last 50, 75 years. So even if an extraterrestrial civilization was trying to find us, and they sort of knew where to look, it wouldn't just be a matter of pointing their scopes in the right direction. They'd have to be waiting for just the right interval of time. So I think you're pointing out how hard it is, and therefore perhaps not surprising that we haven't found any, if indeed life is commonplace throughout the universe. And the other thing is, look, we now know of so many planets, right? That's one of the major changes in the last decade, right? There are so many planets out there. And if a fraction of them support life, right, there could be whatever. There could be, 100 million civilizations scattered throughout the galaxy, okay? But that's one per enormous number of stars. So it's still very sparse, even with 100 million civilizations out there. So it's hard to find.
And what about your take on astrobiology and the likelihood of a species suffocating itself? I'm curious to hear what Dawkins'
yes, and there's a further source of pessimism would be that the interval of time between a civilization working out how to send radio waves and destroying itself by warfare of some sort. Yeah. It could be, there could be civilizations winking into existence here or there and then winking out again after a rather short time. I guess that's another aspect of your suffocating, I think.
So quickly, we're at 10 o'clock, but I think we started a little bit later. You guys okay to do another 5-10 minutes? Is that okay? Okay.
There seems to be a widespread idea in the culture that in order for life to be meaningful, we all eventually have to die. And I'm a little skeptical of that idea. It seems meretricious, like makes us feel better that there has to be some meaning. But if you imagine asking someone 50 years going by in their life, is your life still meaningful? Are you involved in useful projects? Are you advancing things? It seems like life could still be meaningful no matter how old you're getting. So I wonder what your thoughts are about the necessity of death for the meaning of life.
I'll let Richard.
Well,
address that.
there is a pretty sound Darwinian reason why we die, which I can perhaps briefly explain. Genes mature at different, when I say mature, have their effect at various times during life, and most of them have an effect during early embryology, but then they have effects later and later and later. And if you imagine a gene that makes you die of, for example, cancer at the age of 10, and then another gene that makes you die at the age of 20, another gene that makes you die at the age of 30, 40, etc., the ones that make you die at the age of 10 are never going to get through into the next generation. The ones that make you die at the age of 20, a few of them will get through. Ones that make you die at the age of 30, quite a lot will get through, etc. And ones that make you die when you're 100 will certainly have got through by the time they kill you. So we are a kind of dustbin of late-acting lethal genes, or sub-lethal genes, which is why, from a Darwinian point of view, we die of old age. And there's a more sophisticated versions of that theory. But you seem to be talking rather less in a Darwinian way than in a sort of subjective way, saying, wouldn't it be nice if wouldn't life feel more meaningful, I think was the way you put it, if we didn't die?
No, I was challenging the idea that people spread that in order for life to be meaningful, we have to die. Like, people say life wouldn't be meaningful if we lived forever. And that just seems...
Well, I don't know who says that. I mean,
like Bernard Williams says that. I mean, there are philosophers who've thought this issue through and have made cogent arguments that all the things that give life meaning that we'd usually list, many of them would evaporate if we didn't die, right? I mean, if those of you who your abilities could always improve over time, well, if you have infinite time, you'll be able to achieve anything. So there'll be no real challenge. There'll be no sense of success. Those of you who your abilities will plateau and hit a limit, well, for eternity, you're going to be stuck. Right, that's not going to feel too good either, right? So these are nice, interesting thought experiments. It's hard to really know, but I guess from a flat-footed, straightforward perspective, I just wonder if you had the opportunity. Hey, Professor Dawkins, you've done so much for humanity. We're going to let you live forever. Would you choose that?
No, I maybe 200 years, but. But
at the end of the 200, they came back to you at the end of the 200 and said, your 200's up. Hey, you want a couple hundred more?
Tell you what, I think the only frightening thing about death really is eternity, and I'd rather spend eternity under a general anaesthetic, which is what's going to happen.
All right, so we only have time for 2 more questions.
I have a question for both of you. I'm curious if you think it's possible or even likely that the true nature of reality and physics could be something that's fundamentally just inaccessible to the human mind because the way our brains are wired.
No, I had a NOVA program years ago on a book I wrote, and in one of the scenes, I'm at a blackboard lecturing to somebody who clearly is not getting because I'm getting frustrated, and ultimately the camera pans. And it's a Labrador Retriever that I was, and it was misunderstood by many people. They thought we were trying to say the audience is like the dog, but that's not what it is. The point was there are intelligent species that walk this planet that seem to have a limit to what they can understand, right? Dogs and cats are smart, but they seem not to understand the general theory of relativity, right? And every time I say that, I always think the dog's going, he thinks we don't understand relativity, stupid human, But barring that possibility, there are these smart beings that have a limit. Why would we be any different from that? That's the point. So exactly like you're saying, it could be the truth is right out here staring us in the face, but we just don't have the brain power to grab hold of it. And maybe we never will. Now, the optimistic way of saying it is, even with this limited brain power, look what we've been able to figure out, right? We can figure out laws that tell us how the universe evolved from a split second after the beginning. We're able to pry apart matter and understand its constituents. We understand how time elapses, how space expands, why stars shine. I mean, that's pretty great stuff. So maybe we have the brain power and it's just a matter of time. But nobody can say for sure.
One of my favorite science fiction stories is Fred Hoyle's The Black Cloud. Despite its obnoxious hero, it's probably modeled after the author, I should imagine. I don't know. But at the end of the book, the humans are in touch with a superhuman intelligence. And the superhuman intelligence, the Black Cloud, communicates to them its knowledge of physics, and they can't take it. The human brain just burns up, and two really smart physicists die as a result of overheating of the brain. And so that I think is perfectly possible, that we are not capable of it. On the other hand, I agree with Brian. I'm amazed at the fact that a brain which was naturally selected on the African savannah to hunt and gather is capable of devising special general relativity, quantum theory, and it's astonishing what the human brain can do, given the much more limited tasks which it was required to do when it was being naturally selected. These are emergent properties. It's a wonderful testament to the power of emergence. And so maybe there isn't a limit, but I don't know one way or the other.
Thanks.
Hello. Do you think that modern physicists are worried enough or spending enough time on realism and ontology? And specifically, what do you think of Bohmian pilot waves?
That is exactly the question I'd hoping we'd end on. We just had a conference, for instance, at Columbia last week, where the focus was philosophers were involved, and some physicists have sort of described philosophers as having no role in physics. That's utterly ridiculous. These are folks who've thought hard about quantum physics, forcing us to really try to link up the mathematical symbols with real things in the world and to shake those dictionaries and make sure that they really work. And we're uncertain at the moment. So on the ontology side, people do think about it, but it's typically more in the philosophy side of things. And I do think that physicists could do more to advance that project. In terms of this Bohmian approach that you mentioned, this is a very interesting story that I'll just tell in 30 seconds. The approach to quantum mechanics that Richard was describing, the Copenhagen approach, that was really in some sense promulgated by some very convincing physicists in the 1920s, 1930s, and so forth. Niels Bohr being sort of the famous father of quantum mechanics. If the Bohmian approach had a champion of that magnitude and that level of respect, I think it would likely have been the dominant way that we would have thought about quantum mechanics. Why? In the Copenhagen approach, you have to give up making definite predictions. You can only make probabilistic predictions. That's hard to swallow, okay? But you also have to give up particles having definite trajectories. Particles no longer go along trajectories as in the Newtonian picture. In the Bohmian approach, yes, you also have to deal with probabilities, but particles do have definite trajectories. So you only have to sort of give up one thing in the Bohmian framework, and you have to give up two in the Copenhagen one. So I think people would have had an easier time and would have latched on to this way of thinking about things. People still push this theory forward. Whether or not it's actually right in the sense of it's the real description of the world, nobody knows. But it's a worthy contender in an arena where many are still competing to win out with the right way of thinking about quantum mechanics. And with that, thank you very much.
Let's give a big round of applause for Brian Greene and Richard Dawkins.
Thank you, sir. Terrific. That was well done. Thank you very much. Wonderful.
All right, you guys, thank you so much. Please join us in the lobby for a book signing. I think there's a few left to grab.
Sorry, can I just say?
Richard has something to say.
Is my mic still on? Okay. On the book signing, it's a very large audience, and out of courtesy to people at the end of the signing queue, we don't want to take too long at the beginning of the signing queue. And therefore, we cannot personalize, actually dedicate books to particular people, and also please no selfies.
All right, thank you guys so much. Remember to go to pangburnphilosophy.com, check out our events that are coming up this month, and let art and science inspire. Good night.
His eyes full of visions, he prostrate on the ground in his village, told of a monstrosity called capitalism. Said the food they grew would be shipped from the country, and they barely get by. Well, someone else got the money. Said the government helped these people out with the army. Problems that were never big would inflate alarmingly fast, but the people walked past. He thrashed on the grass. Nobody paid attention except the few who had a laugh. No mind could imagine such a change of scenery. The culture was strong and intact like the greenery. But not for long. To the planet at last, man. Revolution made it happen really fast.